The fluorescent lights of Walter Reed National Military Medical Center hummed with their usual sterile consistency, but on the fourth floor in the high-security containment wing, the staff privately called the cage, the air felt heavy, charged with violence and despair. Grace Sullivan stood outside room 402 watching through the reinforced glass as the man inside thrashed against leather restraints hard enough to make the bed frame rattle against the floor bolts. It was 11 p.m. on a Thursday, her first shift as a transfer nurse from Mercy General. The night supervisor, Margaret Barnes, stood beside her with a clipboard clutched so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "That's Master Chief Finn Maddox," Margaret said, her voice tight with exhaustion and fear. "SEAL Special Operations, multiple deployments. He's been with us 4 days. Sepsis from gunshot wounds, severe PTSD, fever spiking to 104.6. He broke an orderly's jaw yesterday, cracked 3 of Ramirez's ribs this morning when we tried to change his IV." Grace watched the man in the bed. Even emaciated by weeks of infection and blood loss, his frame was imposing. His body was a tapestry of scars, old shrapnel wounds from Hellman knife marks, from the Horn of Africa, and the fresh, jagged suture line running down his torso from whatever had finally brought him here. He was screaming orders to a squad that wasn't there, his eyes wide and unseeing. "RPG 3 o'clock. Get down, damn it. Ghost, talk to me. Ghost." His voice was a gravelly shred of command authority, the kind of voice that made people obey without thinking. But there was desperation in it now. A man watching his brothers die over and over in an endless loop, his fever-cooked brain couldn't escape. Dr. Ann Whitmore appeared beside them, young and competent, and clearly at the end of her rope. "We're discussing a medically induced coma within the hour. If we don't sedate him heavily, his heart's going to give out. But I can't in good conscience send my people in there again." "What about antibiotics?" Grace asked quietly. "We've maxed him out on haloperidol and Ativan. He burns through sedatives like they're candy, and he keeps ripping out the IV lines before we can get the antibiotics in. The infection is winning." Grace studied the man through the glass. She watched his mouth moving, reading the shapes of the words he was screaming. Cover fire. Extraction. Eagle. Broken. A flicker of recognition crossed her face, gone so fast neither the doctor nor the head nurse noticed. But Grace had noticed. She'd recognized those words. Not just words. Call signs. Tactical language. The specific phraseology of a mission she would never forget. "Don't put him in a coma," Grace said. It wasn't a request. Dr. Whitmore turned, eyebrows raised. "Excuse me. If you put him under, he stays in the nightmare. He's not fighting you, he's fighting the ambush. If you sedate him into unconsciousness, you trap him there. He needs to be grounded, not drugged." Margaret laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "And you think you can ground him, honey? We had a psychiatrist with 30 years of trauma experience in there." Maddox threw a bedpan at his head. "The man is a Navy SEAL sniper. He's trained to kill, and right now his brain thinks we're the enemy." Grace set down her thermos of coffee. She walked over to the supply cart and grabbed a pair of gloves with the steady deliberation of someone who'd already made a decision and was simply going through the motions of implementation. "I'll take his room." The nurse station went silent. "I can't authorize that," Dr. Whitmore said. "The liability alone." "I'll sign a waiver," Grace said, already tying a plastic isolation gown over her scrubs. "You need the antibiotics in him within the hour or he goes into septic shock. You can't get a vein if he's thrashing. I'll get him to hold still." Margaret exchanged a look with Dr. Whitmore. They were desperate. They were understaffed. And frankly, they were terrified of the man in room 402. "If he hurts you," Margaret warned, "security is 30 seconds out. Don't be a hero. Just get the IV in and get out." Grace nodded. She didn't look like a hero. She looked like a woman walking to the gallows who had accepted her fate long ago. She swiped her badge on the reader. The heavy magnetic lock clicked, disengaged. She took a deep breath, not of fear, but of preparation. She wasn't just walking into a hospital room. She was walking back into a war. The air inside room 402 smelled of rubbing alcohol sweat and the metallic tang of old blood. The rhythmic whoosh click of the ventilator, which Maddox had fought off earlier, stood idle in the corner. The only sound was his ragged, wet breathing and the straining of the leather straps. Grace closed the door behind her. The sound of the latch clicking shut made Finn freeze. His head snapped toward her. His eyes were bloodshot pupils dilated to black pools. He didn't see a nurse. In his delirium, he saw an insurgent entering the kill zone. "Contact front!" he rasped, his voice tearing at his throat. He lunged the bed, heaving. "Back! Get back!" Grace didn't retreat. She didn't raise her hands in the universal calm down gesture that medical staff usually used. Instead, she stood perfectly still, her hands at her sides, palms open but low. Her posture wasn't defensive, it was attentive, alert, the stance of someone who understood violence and respected it. "Finn," she said. Her voice wasn't the soothing, high-pitched tone nurses used for agitated patients. It was low flat and carried the weight of absolute authority. "Traitor!" Finn screamed, spitting the word. "You left us! You left us in the valley!" He yanked his left arm and a fresh trickle of blood ran down his wrist where the restraint was digging into his skin. The heart monitor began to wail, the tachycardia alarm flashing red. Grace took a step forward. "Don't come closer," he roared. "I'll kill you, I swear!" He choked on a cough, his body convulsing. Grace moved then. She didn't run, but she moved with a tactical efficiency that didn't match her nursing credentials. She closed the distance to the bedside in 3 smooth strides. Finn lashed out with his free hand, which he had somehow partially worked out of the strap, swinging a heavy plastic water pitcher he'd grabbed from the side table. It was a clumsy blow, but it had the weight of a desperate man behind it. The pitcher smashed into Grace's shoulder. It hurt, a sharp, bruising impact that would turn purple by morning, but she didn't flinch and she didn't cry out. She absorbed the blow and used the moment of his overextension to step right up to the rail. She leaned down, her face inches from his, ignoring the sweat and the rage radiating off him. "Maddox," she said, her voice cutting through his screams like a blade. He was winding up for another hit, his eyes wild, completely unreachable. Grace leaned closer to his ear, her lips brushing the stubble on his jaw, and whispered 5 words. 5 words that Dr. Whitmore and Nurse Barnes outside the glass couldn't hear. 5 words that no civilian should have known. Sierra 1, Silent Hawk, checkmate. The effect was instantaneous. It was as if she had cut the strings of a marionette. Finn's arm dropped. The tension drained from his neck. His eyes, previously darting around the room in a frenzy, locked onto hers with a terrifying laser-like focus. The monitor slowed its frantic beeping. He stared at her, his chest heaving. The hallucinations of the hospital room, the enemies, the fire, the smoke seemed to recede, replaced by the confusion of reality trying to reassert itself. "Who?" His voice was a broken whisper. "Who are you?" Grace didn't answer immediately. She reached down, gently took his wrist, and loosened the restraint that was cutting into his skin. He didn't fight her. He watched her hands, steady, precise, bearing calluses that didn't belong on a nurse. "We need to get the antibiotics in, Finn," she said, her voice returning to a professional calm, though her eyes remained locked on his. "The infection is winning. I need you to let me work." He blinked, sweat dripping into his eyes. You said the code." "I did." That op is redacted. It doesn't exist." "I know," Grace said. She prepped the IV line, her movements practiced and swift. "That's why you're going to let me treat you. Because I'm the only one in this building who knows you aren't crazy." Finn watched her, the rage gone, replaced by a profound, haunting suspicion. "Sierra 1, he muttered. "That was the comms channel, the Overwatch." Grace stopped. She held the needle, looking at him. "I was the voice, Finn. I was the one who told you to turn left at the ridge." Finn's breath hitched. A tear, hot and angry, leaked from the corner of his eye. You're the reason I'm alive. And you're the reason my men are dead." Grace didn't look away. "We have a lot to talk about, but first the medicine." Slowly, Finn extended his arm. He stopped fighting. Outside the glass, Dr. Whitmore's jaw dropped. "What on earth did she say to him?" she whispered to Margaret. "I don't know," Margaret said, shivering slightly. "But look at him. He looks like he just saw a ghost." For the next 3 hours, Grace Sullivan was the guardian of room 402. She changed his dressings, a gruesome task involving packing gauze into the deep tissue wounds on his thigh. Any other patient would have screamed. Finn just stared at the ceiling, grinding his teeth, sweat pooling in his clavicles. Grace worked in silence, but it was a companionable silence. The kind of silence shared by 2 people who had seen the same horrors from different angles. Around 2 a.m. the fever broke. Finn's temperature dropped to 100.5. He was lucid for the first time in 4 days. "Water," he croaked. Grace was there instantly, holding a cup with a straw to his lips. Slowly, "You'll vomit." He drank, his eyes tracking her face. Now that the delirium had faded, he was studying her with the analytical intensity of a sniper. He was looking for threats, for tells, for lies. "You're not a nurse," he rasped. "I am a nurse," Grace corrected, checking his vitals monitor. "RN licensed in Virginia and Maryland. You move like a field operative. You took that hit from the pitcher like it was nothing. And you know the code. Grace pulled the stool over and sat down. The hospital was quiet now, the night shift settling into its graveyard rhythm. I'm a nurse now, she said carefully. Before that, I was an intelligence analyst for the NSA, seconded to JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command. I was the tactical communications officer for Operation Silent Hawk. Finn flinched at the name. Silent Hawk, the operation that had ended his career and taken his team. I was in the TOC Tactical Operations Center in Bagram. Grace continued softly. I was watching your drone feed. I was the one talking to you when the comms went down. Finn closed his eyes. The hospital room melted away. Afghanistan, March 2021. The Wardak Valley. The heat was suffocating, even at night. Finn callsign Wraith was perched on a limestone ridge, looking through the scope of his Macmillan T-850. His spotter ghost petty officer Wyatt Parker was beside him. Their team of 6 was positioned in overwatch, covering approaches to a compound where high-value targets were supposedly meeting. Wraith to overwatch. We have eyes on the HVT compound. Activity confirmed. Waiting on green light. The voice in his earpiece had been calm, female, and crisp. Solid copy, Wraith. Hold position. We have thermal movement 2 clicks north. Possible flank. That voice. It had been his lifeline for 6 hours. She had guided them. She had warned them of patrols. She had been the angel on his shoulder. And then it had gone wrong. The intel was bad. The meeting they were watching was a trap. The flank wasn't possible. It was already there. Mortars started walking up the ridge before they even knew they were compromised. Ambush, ambush. We are taking effective fire from the east, Ghost had screamed. Pull back to extraction point Alpha. Ugh, the female voice had ordered, her tone shifting from calm to urgent, but never panicked. Wraith, you have a technical moving up the wadi, 200 meters. Engage. He had fired. He had dropped the driver, but there were too many. Mortars, machine guns, RPGs. The ridge became a kill box. Ghost took a round to the neck. The radio filled with static and screams. Hawk, Iron Reaper, Shadow Viper. All of them calling for help, for air support, for anything. The last thing he remembered before the medevac chopper, which arrived 2 hours too late for Ghost and 3 others, was that voice. Stay with me, Wraith. Keep talking. I'm not leaving you. Focus on my voice. Breathe. Back in the hospital room, Finn opened his eyes. He looked at Grace with a mixture of wonder and rage. I thought I imagined you, he whispered. I thought you were just my brain trying to comfort me while I bled out. I stayed on the line for 4 hours, Grace said, her voice trembling slightly for the first time. Even after your radio went dead, I kept talking just in case you could hear me. I violated protocol. My CO ordered me to switch frequencies to coordinate the airstrike, but I refused to disconnect from your personal comms. Why toi? Because I sent you there, Grace said. A tear finally escaped, tracking down her cheek. The intel that put you on that ridge, it came from my desk. I analyzed the signal intercepts. I said the area was clear. The meeting was legitimate. The compound was the target. I was wrong. The silence in the room was deafening. This was the twist, the knife in the wound. She wasn't just his savior. In a very real way, she was the architect of his nightmare. Finn's face hardened. You authorized the mission. I provided the assessment. It was wrong. We were being fed false data by a double agent in the Afghan National Army. I didn't catch it until it was too late. Finn looked away, staring at the wall. The monitor beeped faster. Anger, grief, and confusion swirled in his chest. He wanted to strangle her. He wanted to thank her. He wanted answers. So you're here to what? Finn asked, his voice cold. Atone, wash away the guilt by changing my bedpans. I'm here because you're in danger, Finn, Grace said, leaning in, her voice dropping to a whisper. And not from the sepsis, Finn frowned. I'm in a hospital. I know I'm in danger. Dying of infection kind of tips you off. No, Grace shook her head. The sepsis is manageable now that I've got the antibiotics in. I'm talking about a different kind of danger. She reached into her scrub pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. She unfolded it and held it up for him to see. It was a printout of a pharmacy order for Finn Maddox, patient 402. Look at the medication list, she said. Finn squinted, his vision still fuzzy from the fever. Antibiotics, painkillers, standard post-trauma cocktail. Look at the dosage for the potassium chloride, Grace pointed. Finn, having been a medic in his early SEAL years, looked at the number. His eyes widened. That's a lethal dose. That would stop my heart. Exactly, boy. Grace said, tucking the paper away. This was ordered 2 hours ago by a doctor who doesn't exist in the hospital registry. Dr. Malcolm Harrison. I checked. No such person on staff. It was scheduled to be administered in your morning IV bag at 6 a.m. Finn tried to sit up, but fell back weak. Someone's trying to kill me. Here, in Walter Reed. The double agent wasn't just some Afghan soldier, Grace said grimly. The leak came from inside. Someone high up wanted your team gone because you saw something in that compound you weren't supposed to see. And now they know you're waking up. They know you might remember. Remember what? I don't know, Grace said, but I intend to find out. And I intend to get you out of here before the morning shift starts. Because that doctor who ordered the potassium, he's coming to check on his work at 6 a.m. Finn looked at the clock on the wall. 3:45 a.m. I can't walk, Finn said. My leg is shredded. I know, Grace said. She stood up and moved to the window, peering through the blinds at the dark parking lot below. That's why we're not walking. We're taking the hearse. The digital clock on the wall flickered to 4:15 a.m. The hospital was in the deepest part of its slumber, that eerie twilight hour, where only the gravest emergencies and the dead were moving. Grace moved with terrifying efficiency. She didn't just unplug the machines, she hacked them. Pulling a small tablet from her scrub waistband tech that was definitely not standard issue for a nurse, she spliced a loop into the central monitoring station's feed. On the screens at the nurse's station, Finn Maddox's heart rate would continue to show a steady, albeit elevated 100 beats per minute. His oxygen saturation would look stable. To the world outside room 402, the monster was sleeping. You have to trust me, Grace whispered, pulling a heavy black zippered bag from the bottom of the supply cart. It wasn't a laundry bag. It was a body bag. Finn stared at it, his face pale and beaded with cold sweat. The pain in his leg was a dull, throbbing roar, but the adrenaline of the situation was sharpening his mind. I'm not going out in a bag, Grace. That's bad juju. It's the only way out of the ward without a security clearance scan, she hissed. The morgue elevator is the only one that doesn't require a badge swipe for the basement levels. We have a 10-minute window before the night shift orderly, a guy named Stan, comes for his rounds. If we aren't in the basement by then, we're trapped. Finn gritted his teeth and nodded. Do it. Getting a 200-pound SEAL with a shattered leg and recovering sepsis infection into a body bag was a nightmare of physics and pain. Finn suppressed a scream as he shifted his weight, his vision graying out for a second. Grace was surprisingly strong, bracing his weight, guiding his movements with professional detachment. Breathe, she commanded softly. Dissociate, go to your happy place. My happy place is a bar in San Diego, Finn grunted, squeezing his eyes shut as she zipped the bag up to his chest. And you're buying the first round. Deal. Now stay absolutely silent. If you cough, if you groan, we're dead. She zipped the bag shut. Darkness swallowed him. The smell of plastic and chemical disinfectant was overwhelming. He felt the lurch as Grace hoisted the gurney and unlocked the wheels. The journey down the hallway was a symphony of terrifying sounds magnified by the darkness of the bag. The squeak of the gurney wheel, the distant murmur of voices at the nurse's station, his own heartbeat hammering against his ribs. Night, Grace, a voice called out. It was Margaret. Finn's heart hammered so hard he was sure they could hear it through the plastic. Good night, Margaret. Grace's voice was calm, casual. Just taking the trash down, grabbing more saline on the way back up. All right. Hey, is he asleep? The monster out like a light, Grace said. Finally broke the fever, thank God. Maybe we'll get a quiet shift after all. The gurney kept moving. The sounds of the ward faded, replaced by the hollow echo of the elevator lobby. Finn felt the vibration of the call button being pressed. The ding of the elevator arrival was loud as a gunshot. They rolled in. The door slid shut. The sensation of descending was nauseating for Finn in his enclosed space. The doors opened into the basement. The air temperature dropped 10 degrees, the morgue. We're clear, Grace whispered, unzipping the bag just enough for him to breathe fresh air. Finn gasped, gulping down the cool air. That was the longest 3 minutes of my life. We're not done, Grace said, pushing the gurney toward the loading bay. The hearse is waiting. My contact left it unlocked. They reached the bay doors. A sleek black vehicle was backed up to the ramp. It wasn't a standard hearse. It was a modified transport van used by a private funeral home, Restful Gardens. Grace opened the back doors, but as she turned to help Finn out of the bag, a shadow detached itself from the pillar near the driver's side. You're off shift early, Nurse Sullivan, a deep, smooth voice said. Grace froze. Her hand went instinctively to her pocket where she had a scalpel she'd swiped from the tray. A man stepped into the light. He was wearing a suit that cost more than Grace's car. He had silver hair, a winning smile, and eyes that were completely dead. "And you seem to be stealing government property," the man said, nodding at the body bag. "Mr. Maddox is a very expensive asset. We can't just have him wandering off." Finn recognized the voice. It wasn't a doctor. It wasn't a soldier. "Stone," Finn rasped from the bag, the name clawing its way up from his suppressed memories. Garrett Stone. The name hit the air like a curse. He wasn't military. He was private defense contractor, the CEO of Titan Defense Group, the man who handled the dirty logistics for off-the-books operations in the Middle East. Stone smiled, pulling a silenced pistol from his jacket. "You remember me, Master Chief. That's unfortunate. I was hoping the sepsis would have scrambled your brains enough to make this easier." "You set us up," Finn growled, struggling to sit up in the bag, but the heavy zipper snagged. "I managed a risk," Stone corrected. "Your team stumbled onto a transaction that was financing essential allies. You weren't supposed to be there. You were supposed to be 5 miles east." He raised the gun, aiming it at Grace's chest. "Step away from the gurney, Grace. You're a smart girl, former NSA. You know how the game is played. You walk away, now you disappear, you live. You try to play hero, and you become just another tragic suicide in the hospital parking lot." Grace stood her ground. She looked at the gun, then at Stone. She didn't look scared. She looked calculating. "You're right, Garrett," she said. "I do know how the game is played. That's why I didn't come alone." Stone frowned. "What?" Grace raised her left hand. In it, she held what appeared to be a dead man's switch trigger, a small remote with a conspicuous red button. "I rigged the main oxygen feed with a shaped charge. Cleaning supplies in a defibrillator battery. Very unstable." She wasn't lying, or maybe she was. With Grace, it was hard to tell. "You fire that gun, my thumb slips. This entire basement becomes a bomb. You, me, Finn, and half the hospital go up in a fireball." Stone hesitated. It was just a second of doubt, but it was enough. Thump. Finn had freed his right leg. Ignoring the agony of his torn muscles, he kicked the gurney's locking brake. The heavy steel table lurched forward, slamming into Stone's knees. The gun went off, the suppressed round shattering the rear window of the hearse. Stone buckled. Grace didn't wait. She grabbed a heavy oxygen tank from the rack beside her and swung it with the force of a sledgehammer. It connected with Stone's temple with a sickening crunch. The contractor collapsed unconscious. Jesus. Finn breathed, finally unzipping the rest of the bag and sliding out, nearly falling. "Did you really rig the hospital to blow?" Grace looked at the remote in her hand, which was actually just the garage door opener for the hearse. She tossed it to him. "No, but he didn't know that. Get in the van." They drove for 6 hours. Grace drove like she did everything else, fast, precise, and without hesitation. They switched highways 3 times, took back roads through West Virginia, and finally wound their way up a gravel track into the deep, misty Appalachians. Finn passed in and out of consciousness in the back. Grace had hooked him up to a portable IV she'd stolen, and the antibiotics were fighting the war inside his blood, but the physical toll of the escape had been immense. When the van finally stopped, it was in front of a hunting cabin that looked like it hadn't been used since the 90s. Log construction, slate roof, solar panels barely visible under camouflage netting. "Where are we?" Finn groaned as Grace opened the back doors. The mountain air was crisp and smelled of pine and wet earth. "My father's place," Grace said. "He was a survivalist, died 2 years ago. No one knows I kept the deed. It's off the grid. No cell service. Well, water generator power. We're safe here." Getting Finn inside was another struggle, but once he was settled on the dusty leather couch covered in blankets and the fire was roaring in the stone hearth, the tension began to bleed out of the room. Grace boiled water. She cleaned his wounds again, the deep tissue damage requiring fresh packing. She made instant soup. It was domesticity born of desperation. "You knew Garrett Stone," Grace said, handing him a mug of broth. It wasn't a question. Finn stared into the fire. The name was unlocking doors in his mind he had welded shut. "He was at Bagram," Finn said slowly. "A week before the mission, meeting with the colonel. I saw him in the mess hall. He wasn't wearing a uniform, just that expensive suit. He looked at us like we were inventory. Titan Defense Group has a contract with the DoD worth $4 billion, Grace said, sitting on the floor rug, cleaning her stolen scalpel with methodical precision. "They handle the logistics supply chains. But the NSSA started seeing flags about 3.5 years ago, money moving into accounts in Pakistan that were linked to Taliban commanders. Big money." "Payoffs," Finn said. "Protection money," Grace corrected. Stone was paying the insurgents to not attack his supply convoys. It's cheaper to pay the enemy than to hire more security. Finn's grip on the mug tightened until his knuckles turned white. So my team, we were hit because the intel I analyzed, Grace said, her voice heavy with guilt, it picked up a meeting. We thought it was a high-level terror cell planning an attack. It wasn't. It was a handover. Stone's men were delivering a payment to the local warlord. Cash and something else. Your team dropped right on top of a business deal. Finn closed his eyes. The memory hit him with the force of a physical blow. The compound, the heat. He was looking through the scope. He saw the bearded men with AK-47s. But he saw something else too. A man in desert camo vest, but wearing civilian pants. An American, handing something to the warlord. Not just a briefcase. Cases. Plural. With markings he couldn't quite make out at that distance. He had radioed it in. I have a Western male non-combatant interacting with the target. Multiple containers. Unknown contents. That was when the comms had gone crazy. That was when the ambush started. They couldn't let us leave, Finn whispered. We were witnesses. Exactly, Grace said. And when you survived, Stone panicked. He needed you dead before you could piece it together. That's why he sent the fake doctor. That's why he was at the hospital tonight. Finn looked at Grace for the first time, really looked at her. Not as a nurse or a voice on the radio, but as a woman who had blown up her entire life to save him. You realize what this means, he said. You're done. You can never go back. You're a fugitive. Kidnapping a patient, assault on a civilian, theft of government property, hacking hospital systems. They'll paint you as a domestic terrorist. Grace shrugged, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. I was done the moment I heard your voice on that radio, all those years ago, Finn. I lived with the ghost of your team every day. I checked your file every week, tracking your recovery, your struggles. When I saw the transfer order putting you in Walter Reed's long-term care ward with that sepsis diagnosis, I knew. I had to act. My life before this, it was just waiting for this moment. So what now, Finn asked. We're two people against $1 billion defense contractor and potentially elements of the U.S. government. Grace stood up and walked to a rusted metal cabinet in the corner of the room. She keyed in a combination lock that clicked open with well-oiled precision. My father, she said, opening the cabinet, was paranoid. He believed the government would eventually turn on its own people. Didn't trust banks, didn't trust institutions. She reached inside and pulled out a heavy green metal box. Military issue, waterproof, airtight. She set it on the table and opened it. Inside sat a high-frequency military radio, an encrypted hard drive, and a stack of cash bound with rubber bands. He was crazy, she said, but he was prepared. She lifted the hard drive. This contains the raw signal intercepts from that night in Wardak. The ones my superiors at NSA told me to delete. I kept a copy. Everything. The false data from the double agent, the real thermal signatures showing the ambush, set up the compromised communications showing someone warned the Taliban you were coming. Finn sat up straighter, ignoring the pain. You have the proof. I have the data, Grace said, but it's encrypted with NSA-grade rolling keys. I can't crack it. Not alone. I'm an analyst, not a cryptographer. To open this, we need the decryption keys, and there's only one place that would have a backup. Finn looked at her. Titan Defense. Their secure server facility in Northern Virginia, not the DC headquarters that's just for show. The real operation, the classified contracts, the financial records, the backup encryption keys for operations they were involved in. It's all there. Finn laughed, a dry, raspy sound. So we just need to break into the most secure private military facility in the region, steal their decryption codes, and upload the evidence to the press without getting killed by a private army. Grace smiled. It was a dangerous smile. Essentially, yes. Finn looked at the radio, he looked at the drive, and then he looked at the woman who had saved his life twice now. Well, Finn said, reaching for his painkillers. I suppose I'm not dying today. When do we start? We don't, Grace said. Not yet. First you heal, and I teach you how to walk again. Because where we're going, you're going to need to do more than walk. You're going to need to hunt. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, masking the sound of a drone buzzing high above the cloud layer, thermal sensors searching, finding nothing through the forest canopy. They were safe, for now, but the hunt had already begun. The old Ford pickup truck rattled up the mountain road as dawn broke over the Appalachian ridgeline. Grace Sullivan sat at the small wooden table in the cabin, surrounded by papers, satellite images, and floor plans, a cup of coffee growing cold beside her laptop. Finn was asleep on the couch, his fever finally gone, his breathing steady. The IV drip she'd maintained for the past 18 hours had done its work. It had been 2 days since the escape from Walter Reed. 2 days of Grace changing bandages, monitoring vitals, keeping Finn stable. 2 days of waiting for Stone's people to find them. They hadn't come. Not yet. Grace knew why. Stone thought they'd run far. He'd expect them to flee to Mexico, to disappear into Central America, to hide in plain sight in some major city. He wouldn't think to look for them in the mountains of West Virginia in a dead man's cabin that existed on no official records. Her father, Sergeant Rowan Sullivan, had taught her well. If you need to hide, he'd said during one of their long weekends in these woods, don't hide where they expect. Hide where they've already looked and dismissed. The sound of tires on gravel broke her concentration. Grace was on her feet instantly, hand reaching for the Glock 19 her father had left in the gun safe. She moved to the window, staying in the shadows, and peered out. An old Jeep Wrangler forest green caked in mud was pulling up beside her van. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. Late 60s, maybe 70, but moving with the easy confidence of someone who still had all his faculties. Salt and pepper beard, flannel shirt, canvas jacket. He carried a large duffel bag in one hand. Grace's finger moved to the trigger guard. She didn't recognize him, but something about his posture, his bearing was familiar. The man walked to the cabin door and knocked. 3 raps, pause, 2 raps. A pattern. Grace's breath caught. That was her father's knock, the one he'd taught her when she was 12. The signal that meant friend, not foe. She opened the door slowly, gun held low but ready. The man looked at her, then at the gun, and smiled. You've got Rowan's eyes, and his trigger discipline. I'm Royce McKenna. Your dad and I served together. Rangers a rock back when we still thought we could fix that place. Grace didn't lower the gun. How do I know that? Rowan told me if anything ever happened to him, I should check on his daughter. The one who joined NSA. The one who quit after Afghanistan. Royce set down the duffel bag. He said if you were ever at this cabin outside of deer season, it meant you were in trouble. And given that it's April and there's a stolen medical van in your driveway, I'd say Rowan was right. And Grace studied him. What's in the bag? Supplies, weapons, first aid, and some things I thought you might need if you're planning to do something extraordinarily stupid. He looked past her into the cabin. That the SEAL from Walter Reed, the one on the news this morning? I'm not on the news. No, but a body was found in the Walter Reed loading bay, identified as Garrett Stone, CEO of Titan Defense. Blunt force trauma, and a Master Chief Finn Maddox is missing from his hospital room. They're calling it a kidnapping. Grace's stomach dropped. Stone's dead. As a doornail, someone hit him hard enough to crack his skull. Police are looking for you and the Master Chief. Royce picked up the duffel. So I figure you've got about 48 hours before they expand the search radius to include these mountains. Mind if I come in? Grace stepped aside. Royce entered, set the duffel on the floor, and immediately went to the wood stove to add more logs. The practiced movements of someone who'd been in this cabin before. Stone's not supposed to be dead, Grace said quietly. I hit him, but not that hard. He was unconscious when we left. Well, someone finished the job, Royce said, which means either he had enemies that found him or someone wanted to make sure he couldn't talk. Either way, you're now wanted for murder. Finn stirred on the couch, waking. He saw Royce in his hand move toward the knife Grace had left on the coffee table. Easy, Master Chief, Royce said, hands up. Royce McKenna, 75th Rangers, retired, friend of Grace's father. I'm here to help. Finn looked at Grace. She nodded. He relaxed slightly but didn't take his eyes off the stranger. Help how? Finn asked. Royce unzipped the duffel. Inside were 2 pistols, ammunition, tactical vests, a tablet computer, and what looked like medical supplies. Rowan and I had a deal. If his daughter ever needed extraction, I'd provide it. No questions asked. Looks like she needs more than extraction. We need to prove Titan Defense was trafficking nuclear material, Grace said, and that they murdered 6 American soldiers to cover it up. Stone was part of it, but he wasn't the only one. Royce's expression darkened. Nuclear material? Spent uranium from decommissioning facilities, Finn said, sitting up slowly. Sold to Taliban warlords. Finn's team witnessed a handover. They were killed for it. And you've got proof encrypted on a drive I can't open, Grace said. We need decryption keys from Titan's secure facility. Royce whistled low. That's not extraction. That's infiltration. You're talking about breaking into a hardened target owned by a defense contractor with private security. I know. And you're doing this, why revenge, justice, Grace corrected, and accountability. 6 men died because I provided bad intelligence. I can't bring them back. But I can make sure the people who killed them face consequences. Royce looked at her for a long moment. Your father would say that's a stupid reason to throw your life away. Would he? No, he'd say it's the only reason worth a damn. Royce sat down heavily in one of the wooden chairs. All right, I'm in. What's the plan? Over the next 3 days, they planned. Grace laid out everything she knew about Titan's Virginia facility. Royce provided tactical expertise. Finn offered insights on security protocols from his SEAL days. They built a strategy, identified weaknesses, developed contingencies. The gala is the key, Grace said, pointing to a news article on her laptop. Wounded Warriors Foundation fundraiser, hosted by Titan at their facility. Black tie event senators, congressmen, military brass, and private security for the high-value donors. You want to walk in as security, Royce said. Sterling Security Solutions. Small firm out of Richmond. I've already added us to their roster. Background checks, credentials, the works. Royce shook his head in admiration. NSA taught you well. The server room is in the basement, Grace continued. During the gala, security focus will be upstairs. We'll have maybe 10 minutes. What about exfil? Finn asked. Service elevator to the garage. I'll have a vehicle positioned. And if it goes wrong, then we improvise. Finn spent the days recovering, working through the pain, regaining strength. Grace put him through physical therapy, rebuilding the muscles in his leg, teaching him to walk without the limp becoming a liability. You're a good nurse, Finn said one afternoon as she wrapped his thigh with fresh bandages. I'm a mediocre nurse, Grace corrected, but I'm an excellent intelligence analyst who learned nursing to have a cover. Is that all this is, a cover? Grace's hands paused. No, I needed to learn to save people. After spending so long in a job that got them killed, I needed to know I could do something good, something immediate. Nursing gave me that. You stayed on the line for 4 hours during Silent Hawk. That was something good. It wasn't enough. Grace, Finn caught her hand. You can't save everyone. You can only do your best. My best got your team killed. No, someone else's betrayal got my team killed. You were a tool they used, just like we were tools they disposed of. Grace pulled her hand away gently and finished the bandaging. I need to finish prepping the infiltration plan. She walked away before Finn could say more, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the weight she carried. Royce watched this exchange from the doorway. Later, he found Grace outside splitting firewood with methodical violence. Your dad used to do that when he had something on his mind, Royce said. Grace didn't stop swinging the axe. Did he ever tell you about the mission that broke him? Fallujah 2006, building collapse. 3 of his squad trapped. He got 2 out. The 3rd died while Rowan was digging. Kid was 19. Name was Cooper. Royce sat on a stump. Rowan blamed himself for years. Said he should have been faster, stronger, smarter. How did he move past it? He didn't. He learned to live with it. There's a difference. Royce pulled out a flask, took a sip, offered it to Grace. She shook her head. Your dad told me once, the dead don't need our guilt. They need us to be better than we were when they died. That's how he survived. By teaching, by preparing, by making sure the next generation learned from his mistakes. Grace stopped swinging. I teach now, intelligence analysis, at CIA, or I did before all this. You planning to go back? If we survive this, maybe. If they'll have a wanted fugitive. You're not a fugitive if you're right. You're a whistleblower. 3 months passed. Grace worked with Finn daily, training him not just physically but tactically, teaching him the difference between military operations and intelligence work. You're too direct, she'd say, watching him move through the cabin. Corporate security doesn't clear rooms. They stand around looking bored and checking phones. Slouch, look disinterested. Finn learned he was good at learning. And slowly something shifted between them. The guilt and anger that had defined their first meeting mellowed into understanding, then respect, then something neither of them wanted to name. One evening as they reviewed floor plans, Finn asked, why me out of everyone you could have helped, everyone you could have investigated? Why focus on Silent Hawk? Grace was quiet for a long time. Because I heard you all die. Most analysts, they see data reports, summaries. Clean, distant. I heard Ghost scream. I heard Hawk call for his mother. I heard you telling them to hold on to stay with you. I heard you crying when you thought your radio was dead and no one could hear. She looked up at him. I couldn't unhear that, so I had to do something about it. The night before the gala, Finn found Grace on the cabin porch, staring at the stars. The same spot where she'd sat 3 months ago, planning, preparing, unable to sleep. You ready? He asked. No, but we're out of time. Finn sat beside her. Grace, if this goes wrong, it won't. If it does, I want you to know something. He waited until she looked at him. What happened during Silent Hawk, that wasn't your fault. I don't blame you. Ghost wouldn't blame you. None of them would. You did your job with the information you had. The people who fed you lies, they're the ones responsible. I know that intellectually, Grace said, but knowing and feeling are different things. Then feel this. You saved my life, twice, and you're about to risk everything to get justice for my team. That's not guilt talking. That's honor. That's duty. That's who you are. He stood. Ghost would have liked you. Grace smiled despite herself. Yeah, he had a thing for smart, dangerous women. The next day they drove to Virginia. Grace behind the wheel, Finn in the passenger seat, both dressed in civilian clothes. Royce had returned to his home, his part done. He'd given them weapons intelligence, and most importantly, the reminder that they weren't alone. Last chance to back out, Grace said as they crossed into Virginia. Not a chance. The Titan Defense Facility was exactly as Grace had described. From the outside, just another corporate building in a business park. Inside a fortress? They arrived at 6:30 p.m., 90 minutes before the infiltration window. The checkpoint guards scanned their sterling security credentials without suspicion. They were waved through. The gala was already in full swing. The atrium had been transformed. Chandeliers string quartet men in tuxedos, women in evening gowns, and scattered throughout, positioned like props, were the wounded veterans. Some in wheelchairs, some with prosthetics, all of them being used to make the donors feel good about themselves. Grace's jaw tightened when she saw them. Easy, Finn murmured. Focus. They positioned themselves near the service entrance, professional and unremarkable. Just two more security consultants in a room full of them. At 7:42 p.m., Grace checked her watch. 3 minutes. At 7:45, Garrett Stone's replacement, the new interim CEO, took the stage for the scheduled toast. The room's attention focused on him. Now, Grace whispered. They slipped through the service entrance into a utilitarian corridor. Grace pulled her tablet, accessed the security feed. Two guards at the server room, we need to bypass them. They descended to the basement level. The air was cooler here, the hum of massive cooling fans filling the space. As they approached the server room, Finn held up a hand. Voices ahead. They pressed against the wall. Two guards, as expected, standing outside a reinforced door. Finn looked at Grace. She nodded. He moved. Excuse me, Finn said, walking toward them with easy confidence. I'm turned around. Where's the bathroom down here? The first guard opened his mouth to answer. Finn's hand shot out a precise strike to the carotid sinus. The guard's eyes rolled back, and he crumpled. The second guard went for his radio, but Finn was already there, a chokehold that cut off blood flow to the brain. 10 seconds later, both guards were unconscious. Bathroom, Finn said, dragging them into a janitor's closet. Classic. Grace pulled a key card from one of the guards, swiped it at the door. The lock clicked, green. The server room was a cathedral of technology. Rows of black towers, blue lights, blinking like stars. The cooling fans were deafening. Grace was already at the main terminal, pulling her encrypted drive from her clutch purse. Her hands moved across the keyboard with practiced speed. What are you doing? Finn asked from the door. Initiating the handshake protocol. This worm will locate the backup decryption keys for the Silent Hawk intercepts. Once it finds them, it uploads the raw files to secure servers, decrypts them, and forwards copies to the Washington Post, New York Times, and FBI Cyber Division. How long? 7 minutes. A progress bar appeared. 5%. Finn watched the hallway. Empty. Quiet. 10%. This is too easy, Finn said. I know. 15%. An alarm began to shriek. Red lights flashed throughout the server room. They know, Finn said. I need more time. How much? 5 minutes. You've got to. 25%. Finn heard boots in the hallway, running. Multiple contacts. 30%. Grace, no, keep them off me. Finn pulled the suppressed pistol from his waistband. The door was their choke point. He had to hold it. 40%. 3 mercenaries breached the door. Professional trained, armed with suppressed carbines. Finn engaged from cover control pairs to center mass. The first man went down, body armor absorbing, but the kinetic energy dropping him. The second man stumbled. The third returned fire. 50%. Grace, we need to move. She was under the console now, still typing, bullets sparking off metal above her head. 60 more seconds. 60%. A flashbang sailed into the room. Eyes, Finn shouted, turning away. The world went white and loud. But Grace had anticipated it, had closed her eyes and kept typing. 70%. The power cut. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. They're cutting power, Grace said, amazingly calm. Doesn't matter. My drive has backup battery. 80%. Finn was out of ammunition. He grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall, used it as a club on the next mercenary through the door, took the man's rifle, an HK-416, and opened fire on the doorway. 90%. Great. Wule, almost there, 95%. Finn heard drilling. They were boring through the lock mechanism, trying to jam the door shut, trap them inside. 99%. 100%. Done. Grace yanked the drive from the port. Files uploaded. Evidence is out. Washington Post, New York Times, 3 FBI. It's everywhere. She looked at Finn in the red emergency lighting, fierce triumph on her face. We did it. Great, Finn said, ejecting an empty magazine. Now how do we get out? Grace pointed at a large ventilation grate near the floor. Through there, drops to sub-basement garage. Finn fired a burst into the grate, kicked it in. Ladies first. Such a gentleman. Grace dove through the opening, sliding down a metal chute. Finn followed, firing one last suppressing burst, then dropped into darkness. They tumbled out onto concrete. A vast underground parking garage stretched in all directions. Luxury cars, armored SUVs, the physical manifestations of corporate wealth. Grace was running the evening gown she'd worn for cover, torn away to reveal the tactical bodysuit underneath. That's convenient, Finn said, matching her pace despite his leg. Magnetic clasps, 30-second release. She pulled a compact pistol from a thigh holster. Exit ramp is north, 50 yards. They ran together, footsteps echoing, behind them shouting, ahead the cool night air and freedom. They were almost there when the voice boomed out, amplified by garage acoustics. I wouldn't. They stopped. Emerging from behind an armored Suburban, flanked by 4 tactical contractors with raised weapons, was not Garrett Stone. It was Colonel Bradford Thornton, the man who had called Grace to help Finn, the man who had authorized their off-book protection detail. He was in tactical gear now, holding his own weapon, and he looked genuinely sorry. Grace, Thornton said heavily, I can't let you leave. Grace stared at him, the betrayal hitting like a physical blow. You were part of this. I didn't have a choice, Thornton said. They have my family, my daughter, my grandchildren. Stone said if I didn't cooperate, if I didn't feed you the mission details, didn't set you up to walk into this, they'd kill them all. So you sold us out. I'm trying to save you. Thornton's voice cracked. They wanted me to kill you in the server room. I refused. I said I'd bring you out alive, make it look like you escaped. But Grace, you uploaded those files. You exposed everything. There's no walking back from this now. Finn's hand moved toward his stolen rifle. Don't, Thornton said. I don't want to shoot you, but I will if I have to. You set up Silent Hawk, Grace said, pieces clicking together. You were the one who provided the false intelligence. You led my team into that ambush. I provided the coordinates Stone gave me. I thought it was just redirecting an observation mission. I didn't know it was a kill box. I didn't know about the nuclear material until years later. Thornton's face was anguished. By then I was in too deep. They had evidence of my involvement. They had leverage on my family. I was trapped. You could have come forward and watched my daughter die. My grandchildren. Thornton shook his head. I chose family over duty. You can judge me for that. God knows I judge myself. What happens now? Finn asked. Now you come with me. There's a transport waiting. You'll be taken to a black site, held until this blows over, then released quietly in another country. You disappear. You live. That's the best I can offer. And if we refuse, Thornton raised his weapon, then I have to kill you. And I really don't want to do that, Grace. Your father was a good man. I served with Rowan in Iraq. He saved my life in Fallujah. I owe him. This is me paying that debt. Taking you alive instead of dead. Grace looked at the 4 contractors. Professional positions. Overlapping fields of fire. Even with Finn's skills, they couldn't fight through this. I need a minute, Grace said, to think. You have 30 seconds. Grace turned to Finn, lowered her voice. I can get us out of this. How? Trust me, when I move you go left. There's a support pillar at your 10 o'clock. Get behind it. Grace, do you trust me? Finn looked into her eyes. Always. Grace turned back to Thornton. All right, we'll go with you, but I want your word as a soldier. Our families aren't touched. We disappear, we stay disappeared, and everyone we care about is safe. You have my word. Then I need to disable the backup I set. Grace pulled her tablet from her bodysuit. If I don't send a stand-down signal in the next 60 seconds, copies of everything go to WikiLeaks, The Guardian, Al Jazeera, and a dozen other international outlets. You'll never contain it. Thornton hesitated. Do it, slowly. Grace's fingers moved across the screen, but she wasn't sending a stand-down signal. She was accessing the building's environmental systems, specifically the fire suppression network. She found what she needed: the main sprinkler control for the garage level. Industrial-grade deluge system designed to flood the entire space in case of vehicle fire. She triggered it manually. Every sprinkler head in the garage activated simultaneously. Water and chemical suppressant blasted down from the ceiling, a sudden torrential downpour. Visibility dropped to near zero. The contractors flinched, momentarily blinded. Now, Grace shouted. Finn dove left toward the pillar. Grace went right toward a parked sedan. The contractors fired, but the water threw off their aim. Rounds sparked off concrete. Thornton didn't fire. He stood frozen, torn between duty and the debt he owed a dead friend. Grace used the chaos. She ran low, using the vehicles for cover, moving toward the exit ramp. Finn provided covering fire, not trying to hit anyone, just suppressing. They reached the ramp together. Grace hit the emergency exit button. The security gate began to rise. "Colonel," one of the contractors shouted, "they're escaping." Thornton raised his weapon, aimed at Grace's back. His finger touched the trigger. Then he lowered it. "Let them go," he said quietly. "Sir, I said let them go. We lost them in the confusion. File the report accordingly." The contractors looked at each other, confused, but they didn't argue with a superior officer. Grace and Finn ran up the ramp and into the Virginia night. Behind them, sirens. Ahead, freedom. They made it to the extraction vehicle, a nondescript Honda Accord Royce had positioned 3 blocks away. Grace drove, hands shaking slightly, now that the adrenaline was fading. "Thornton let us go," Finn said. "He owed my father." "That's a hell of a debt." They drove in silence for 20 minutes before Grace pulled into a rest stop. She killed the engine and sat there, breathing hard. "We did it," Finn said. "The files are out. The evidence is public. It's over." It's not over until Stone's network is dismantled, until everyone involved faces justice. Stone is dead, Grace. Someone killed him. Then we find out who's next in the chain of command. We find them all. Finn looked at her. "How long are you going to keep fighting?" "Until every one of them pays for what they did to Ghost, to Hawk, Iron Reaper, Shadow Viper. Until their deaths mean something." "Grace," Finn took her hand, "they already mean something. You've exposed the biggest defense contractor corruption case in history. You've reformed intelligence protocols. You've done what you set out to do." "Wow. Have I?" Grace's voice broke slightly. "Because I still hear them screaming. I still wake up in the middle of the night hearing Ghost call for help. I still see their faces. That's not going to stop, not ever. But you honor them by living, by teaching others, by being better than the people who killed them." Finn squeezed her hand. "You can't carry this guilt forever. Watch me." She started the engine and drove into the night, heading toward the mountains, toward temporary safety, toward whatever came next. Behind them in the Titan facility, federal agents were already arriving. The files Grace had uploaded had reached the FBI within minutes. Warrants were being executed. Arrests were being made. The machine of justice was grinding into motion. But for Grace Sullivan, former NSA analyst, current fugitive, the war wasn't over. It was just beginning. 6 months later, Grace stood in front of a classroom at the CIA training facility in Quantico, Virginia. 23 young analysts looked back at her with a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. She recognized that look. She'd worn it herself once, back when the world seemed simpler and intelligence work was about finding truth rather than living with the consequences of being wrong. "Intelligence work," Grace began, her voice steady and professional, "is about information. Gathering it, analyzing it, disseminating it. But it's also about something they don't put in the training manuals: accountability." She pulled up a satellite image on the screen behind her. Afghanistan, Wardak Valley, March 2021. A compound in the desert, coordinates that were burned into her memory. During Operation Silent Hawk, I analyzed signal intercepts suggesting this location was clear of hostile activity. Based on my assessment, a 6-man SEAL team was sent in for observation. They were ambushed. 5 men died immediately. 1 survived with career-ending injuries. The room went absolutely silent. The intelligence I provided was wrong. I had been given false data by a compromised source, a double agent working for a defense contractor named Titan Defense Group. I didn't catch the deception. I trusted the information without sufficient verification, and men died because of that failure. A young woman in the front row, maybe 22, raised her hand tentatively. Ma'am, is it true you're the one who exposed the Titan conspiracy? Yes. Is it true your intel led to the Silent Hawk ambush? Grace met her eyes without flinching. Yes, it did. The room stirred uncomfortably. Several students looked at each other, clearly conflicted about how to process this information. Here's what they don't tell you in analyst school. Grace continued, her voice taking on an edge. You will make mistakes. The intelligence you provide will be used to make life and death decisions. Sometimes, despite your best efforts and all your training, you'll get it wrong. People will die, and you'll have to live with that. How do you live with it? The young woman asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Grace was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the weight it deserved. Some days I don't. Some days I wake up at 3 in the morning hearing Petty Officer Wyatt Parker call sign Ghost screaming through the radio. Hearing the moment the round hit him. Hearing him call for help while I sat 6,000 miles away, unable to do anything but listen. She paused, letting that sink in. Several students shifted uncomfortably. But then I get up. I come here. I teach you to be better than I was. I teach you to question sources, to verify data through multiple channels, to never trust a single stream of intelligence, no matter how reliable it seems. I teach you that when something feels wrong, it probably is. And most importantly, I teach you that if you make a mistake, you don't hide from it. You don't cover it up. You own it, you fix it, and you make damn sure it never happens again. A young man near the back raised his hand. Ma'am, how do you fix something like that? If people die because of your analysis, how do you make it right? You can't bring them back, Grace said with brutal honesty. Nothing fixes that. Those 6 men are still dead, but you can honor them. You can make their deaths mean something. The men who died during Silent Hawk, their deaths exposed a 15-year corruption scheme that reached into the highest levels of the defense industry. Their deaths led to reforms in intelligence, verification protocols across the entire intelligence community. They're the reason you're all here learning what I wish I'd known. She pulled up another image. The Arlington Memorial Garden of Honor. 6 names carved in stone. Ghost, Petty Officer Wyatt Parker, Hawk. Petty Officer Brennan Cole Iron. Petty Officer Garrett Nash Reaper. Petty Officer Jackson Holt, Shadow. Petty Officer Callum Reed Viper. Petty Officer Donovan Pierce. I visit them every year, every single year without fail. I tell them what I've accomplished, what their sacrifice enabled. I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I promise them that their deaths won't be meaningless. I promise them that because of what happened, hundreds of future operators will have better intelligence, better verification, better protection. She looked directly at each student in turn. That's how you live with mistakes in this job. You turn them into lessons that save the next generation. You teach, you improve, you prevent the next tragedy. You give their deaths purpose. Another hand, a student Grace recognized from previous classes, sharp and analytical. Ma'am, when you realized the intel was bad, when you knew what had happened, why didn't you just move on? Most people would have taken the guilt and tried to forget. I tried that, Grace said. For about 3 weeks, it didn't work. Because every time I closed my eyes, I heard Ghost's voice. Every time I walked past Arlington, I thought about 6 families destroyed. Every time I saw a SEAL Trident, I remembered that my analysis put those men in a kill zone. She moved away from the podium, her body language shifting from instructor to confessor. So I quit NSA. I became a nurse because I needed to save people with my own hands instead of killing them from behind a computer screen. And I spent 3 years investigating Titan Defense, tracking their money, their operations, their corruption. I built a case. I found evidence. And when the time came, I acted. By kidnapping a patient from Walter Reed, the student asked. There was no judgment in the question, just curiosity. By saving his life, Grace corrected. Master Chief Finn Maddox was the sole survivor of Silent Hawk. Titan was trying to kill him to silence him. I extracted him, protected him, and worked with him to expose the truth. Was it legal, Num? Would I do it again? Absolutely. The class absorbed this. The cognitive dissonance of their instructor admitting to federal crimes while teaching them to follow the law. Here's the thing about this job, Grace said. Sometimes the institution fails. Sometimes the chain of command fails. Sometimes the system that's supposed to protect whistleblowers and reward truth-tellers instead buries both. When that happens, you have to make a choice. Are you someone who follows orders and sleeps well at night? Or are you someone who does what's right and lives with the consequences? Which are you? The young woman in front asked. Grace smiled, but there was no humor in it. I'm someone who spent 3 years hunting a billionaire arms dealer because the system wouldn't. I'm someone who broke into a secure facility and stole classified evidence. I'm someone who's technically still wanted for questioning in multiple jurisdictions. And I'm someone who sleeps better now than I did when I was following orders that felt wrong. She let that hang in the air for a moment before continuing. But understand this, that path comes with a key ending. I can never work in the field again. I'll never get a security clearance above secret. There are countries I can't enter. People who want me prosecuted. My career as an operational analyst is over. All I can do now is teach. Do you regret it? Someone asked. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that the system failed so completely that an analyst and a wounded SEAL had to risk everything to get justice. But I don't regret doing it, because Ghost and the others deserve better than to be buried as classified casualties of a training accident. The class ended. Students filed out slowly, several staying behind to ask follow-up questions. Grace answered them patiently, recognizing in their faces the same hunger for purpose she'd had at their age. When the last student left, Grace gathered her materials and walked out into the Virginia sunshine. The CIA training facility was beautiful in early autumn, trees just starting to turn the air crisp and clean. Finn was waiting by his truck in the parking lot. He'd grown his hair out slightly, started a beard. The limp was barely noticeable now. He looked healthier, more grounded than he'd been in the hospital 6 months ago. How'd it go? He asked as she approached. Good. They're smart kids. Ask good questions. Did you tell them about the garage fire suppression trick? No, that's operational security. Finn smiled. How was the memorial yesterday? I wanted to come, but the VA thing ran late. Grace had driven to Arlington the day before her annual visit to the 6 names carved in stone. It was good, quiet. I brought flowers, told them about the convictions. The Titan case had dominated headlines for months. Garrett Stone's death had initially been ruled a homicide with Grace as the prime suspect, but further investigation revealed Stone had been killed by one of his own contractors, a man named Victor Hale, who'd been erasing loose ends. Hale was now serving life without parole. 43 other individuals in the Titan network had been arrested, charged, and convicted. Senators, Pentagon officials, logistics, contractors. The largest defense corruption case in American history. You should be proud, Finn said. You built that case. We built it. You testified. Your first-hand account of what you saw through that scope, that's what sealed it. I just told the truth. You're the one who spent 3 years collecting evidence while working as a nurse and teaching part-time. Finn leaned against his truck. So what now? You going to keep teaching? For now, CIA wants me to develop a new course on intelligence ethics and accountability. Make it mandatory for all new analysts. Mandatory guilt trips. Sounds fun. Grace actually laughed. It's not guilt. It's awareness. Understanding that the work we do has real consequences. Speaking of consequences, Finn said carefully, have you thought about my offer? 2 months ago, Finn had started a nonprofit organization called the Silent Hawk Foundation. It provided support for families of service members killed in classified operations, helping them navigate the bureaucracy of benefits, memorials, and official recognition. He'd asked Grace to join the board. I've thought about it, Grace said. I'm not sure I'm the right person. The families might not want to see the analyst whose bad intel got their loved ones killed. Or they might want to meet the person who spent 3 years getting them justice. Finn pushed off from the truck. Grace, you can't punish yourself forever. Ghost's fiancée, Sarah, she specifically asked if you'd be willing to meet her. Grace's breath caught. Sarah Parker, Ghost Sarah. She read about the case, put together who you were. She wants to thank you. Thank me, I got Wyatt killed. No, you got him justice. There's a difference. Finn pulled out his phone, showed Grace an email. She lives in Montana now, remarried a few years ago, has a 3-year-old daughter. Guess what they named her? Grace read the email and her vision blurred with tears. Gracie, she whispered. She named her daughter Gracie. After the voice that stayed with Wyatt until the end. After you. Finn put the phone away. She wants to meet you, Grace. She wants you to know that Wyatt forgave you before he died. That he told her if she ever met the woman on the comms to tell her he didn't blame her. Grace sat down heavily on the truck's bumper, the weight of 3 years crashing down on her all at once. She'd imagined this moment countless times, confronting the families, seeing their anger, their grief, their accusations. She'd never imagined forgiveness. When, she asked, her voice small, whenever you're ready, she said to take your time. Grace pulled out her own phone, hands shaking slightly. I'm ready now. 3 weeks later, Grace drove through Montana following GPS coordinates to a small town northeast of Bozeman. The mountains loomed in the distance, snow already capping the peaks despite it only being October. The landscape was vast, beautiful, and utterly unlike the Virginia suburbs where Grace had spent most of her life. Sarah Parker's house was a modest ranch-style home on the edge of town with a large yard where a small child was playing on a swing set. A woman in her early 30s stood nearby watching the child with the careful attention of a mother. Grace parked on the street, suddenly terrified. This was harder than infiltrating Titan, harder than facing Garrett Stone. This was facing the consequences of her failure in the most direct way possible. She forced herself out of the car and walked up the driveway. The woman looked up, and Grace knew immediately it was Sarah. She had kind eyes, brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, and the weathered look of someone who'd survived tremendous pain. "Grace," Sarah called out. "Yes, I'm Grace Sullivan." Sarah walked toward her, and Grace braced for anger for accusations. Instead, Sarah wrapped her in a fierce hug. "Thank you," Sarah whispered. "Thank you for staying with him. Thank you for fighting for him. Thank you for making his death mean something." Grace broke. 3 years of guilt, of nightmares, of carrying the weight of 6 deaths, it all came pouring out. She sobbed into Sarah's shoulder, this stranger who should have hated her, but instead offered grace. "I'm so sorry," Grace choked out. "I'm so sorry. I should have caught it. I should have known the intel was bad. I should have—" "Stop," Sarah said, firmly pulling back to look Grace in the eyes. "Wyatt didn't blame you. The last thing he said before they loaded him on the medevac when he thought he was dying, he said, 'Tell the voice I forgive her. Tell her it wasn't her fault. Tell her to keep fighting.'" Grace couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "He knew you stayed on the line," Sarah continued. "He knew you violated orders to keep talking to him. He knew you cared. And he wanted you to know that he didn't blame you for the bad intel. He blamed the people who lied to you." The little girl on the swing set called out, "Mommy, push me." Sarah smiled through her own tears. "Come meet Gracie. She needs to meet the woman she's named after." They walked to the swing set together. The little girl, 3 years old with dark hair, and her father's eyes looked up at Grace with innocent curiosity. "Gracie, this is Grace," Sarah said. "The special lady I told you about, the one who helped Daddy." "Hi," Gracie said shyly. Grace knelt down eye level with the child. "Hi, Gracie. It's very nice to meet you. Mommy says you're a hero." Grace looked up at Sarah, questioning. "You are," Sarah said firmly. "Wyatt was a hero, and you honored his heroism by refusing to let his death be for nothing. That makes you a hero, too." They spent the afternoon together. Sarah told stories about Wyatt, about their relationship, about how Grace's voice had been the last thing he talked about before going into surgery. How he'd said the angel on the radio had kept him alive. As the sun began to set, Grace prepared to leave. Sarah walked her to her car. "I have something for you," Sarah said. She pulled a small box from her pocket. Inside was a military dog tag. Wyatt Parker's dog tag. "I can't take this," Grace said. "Yes, you can. Wyatt would want you to have it. He'd want you to remember that you saved him even if you couldn't save him forever. You gave him hours he wouldn't have had. You gave him the chance to say goodbye over that radio. You gave him comfort in his worst moment." Sarah pressed the dog tag into Grace's hand. "And you gave him justice. That's more than most fallen soldiers get." Grace closed her fingers around the metal tag, feeling the raised letters of Wyatt's name. "Thank you," she whispered. "No, thank you for caring, for fighting, for not giving up." Sarah hugged her again. "And Grace, forgive yourself. That's what Wyatt would want. That's what he asked me to tell you if we ever met." Grace drove away from that small Montana town with Wyatt's dog tag hanging around her neck, tucked under her shirt. She drove for an hour before she had to pull over, overwhelmed by the emotion. She sat in her car on the side of a mountain road and cried. Not tears of guilt this time, tears of release, of forgiveness she didn't know she needed, of a burden finally partially lifted. Her phone buzzed, a text from Finn. "How'd it go?" Grace typed back with shaking hands. "I think I'm going to be okay." 3 months later, Grace stood at the podium in Arlington National Cemetery. A small crowd had gathered for the dedication of a new memorial. Family members of the Silent Hawk team, fellow SEALs, Pentagon officials, and media, because the Titan case had made this ceremony newsworthy. Secretary of Defense Patricia Morrison stood beside the covered memorial, preparing to unveil it. "Operation Silent Hawk was classified for 3 years," the secretary said. "The 6 men who died were buried as training casualties. Their families were told they couldn't know the circumstances of their loved ones' deaths. This was wrong. Today we honor these men properly. We acknowledge their sacrifice. We tell the truth. She pulled the covering away. The memorial was simple. 6 names carved in granite with their ranks, their units, and the words, "Died serving with honor, Operation Silent Hawk, March 2021. Ghost, Petty Officer Wyatt Parker Hawk, Petty Officer Brennan. Coal Iron, Petty Officer Garrett Nash. Reaper, Petty Officer Jackson Holt. Shadow, Petty Officer Callum Reed Viper. Petty Officer Donovan Pierce." Below the names a larger inscription, "These warriors uncovered the corruption and paid the ultimate price. Their deaths exposed a network of betrayal and led to the largest defense contractor corruption case in American history. They died as heroes. They are remembered as heroes." Grace stepped forward. She'd been asked to say a few words representing the intelligence community. "I'm Grace Sullivan," she began, her voice steady. "I was the intelligence analyst for Operation Silent Hawk. My assessment sent these men into an ambush. For 3 years I lived with that guilt. I thought honoring them meant punishing myself." She looked at the families gathered. "But I learned something. From Sarah Parker Wyatt's fiancé. From Finn Maddox, the man who survived. From every family member who chose forgiveness over blame. I learned that honoring the fallen isn't about guilt. It's about purpose." She touched Wyatt's name on the memorial. "These 6 men died because of a conspiracy, because of greed, because evil men valued profit over lives. But their deaths weren't in vain. They exposed that evil. They changed how we verify intelligence. They reformed an entire system. They saved future lives by giving their own." Grace stepped back from the memorial. "I will teach analysts to be better than I was. I will train the next generation to question, to verify, to never blindly trust. I will make sure no analyst ever has to stand at a memorial like this knowing they could have prevented it. That's how I honor Ghost, Hawk, Iron, Reaper, Shadow, and Viper. By making their sacrifice mean something." She saluted the memorial. The crowd joined her. After the ceremony, family members approached Grace. Some to thank her. Some to share stories about their loved ones. Not a single one blamed her. Brennan Cole's mother hugged her and whispered, "My son believed in the mission. He wouldn't want you to carry guilt. He'd want you to keep fighting. So keep fighting, honey." Jackson Holt's father himself, a retired Marine, shook her hand. "You did what Marines do. You adapted and overcame. Hooah." One by one, they gave her their forgiveness, their understanding, their support. As the crowd dispersed, Finn approached. "You did good." "I survived," Grace corrected. "That's different from good." "No, you thrived. You took the worst moment of your life and turned it into purpose." He gestured at the memorial. "This exists because of you. These families have closure because of you. The intelligence community is better because of you. That's not surviving. That's winning." Grace looked at the 6 names one last time. "I miss them. I never even met them, but I miss them. That's because you knew them. You heard them at their most vulnerable. You were there in their final moments. That creates a bond." Finn put his hand on her shoulder. "And they're not really gone as long as people like you remember them." 6 months after the memorial dedication, Grace sat in her office at the CIA training facility reviewing student papers on intelligence ethics. Her course had become one of the most popular electives, with a waiting list of analysts wanting to learn from the woman who'd exposed Titan. There was a knock on her door. "Come in." Colonel Bradford Thornton entered, looking older than the last time she'd seen him. He was in civilian clothes, no longer wearing the uniform. "Grace," he said quietly, "I wasn't sure you'd see me." "I almost didn't." Grace set down her papers. "You let us escape that night. I've always wondered why." "Because I owed your father, and because you were right." Thornton sat down without being invited. "I testified against Titan, took a plea deal, served 18 months in Leavenworth, dishonorable discharge, lost my pension. My family barely speaks to me. I know, I followed your case. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. For Silent Hawk, for my part in it, I was weak. I let them use my family as leverage, and good men died because of it." Grace studied him. He looked broken, genuinely remorseful. "Your testimony helped convict 15 people," Grace said. "That counts for something. It doesn't bring back those 6 men." "No, but it prevents the next 6. Grace leaned back in her chair. "You made terrible choices, Colonel. You betrayed your oath. But in the end, you chose right over easy. That's more than some people do. Is that forgiveness? It's acknowledgement. You can't undo what you did, but you can spend the rest of your life making sure others don't make the same mistakes. Thornton nodded slowly. I'm writing a book about moral injury in the military, about the impossible choices we force on people, about how easily good soldiers can be corrupted when their families are threatened. Will you use your real name? Yes, I owe that much. Transparency. Accountability. The things I failed at during my career. He stood to leave. Thank you for seeing me. Colonel, he turned back. My father, Rowan Sullivan. He would have forgiven you. He understood moral injury better than most. He lived with it every day after Fallujah. Thornton's eyes watered. Thank you for that. After he left, Grace sat in silence for a long time. Then she pulled out her phone and called Finn. Hey, he answered. What's up? I'm ready. Or ready for what? To join the Silent Hawk Foundation board, to help the families to stop teaching from the guilt and start teaching from the growth. She could hear Finn's smile through the phone. It's about time. I had to be sure I was doing it for the right reasons, not to punish myself, not to atone, but to help, actually help. When can you start? Tomorrow. 1 year later, Grace stood in the same classroom teaching the same course on intelligence ethics. But something had changed. She no longer started with her failure. She started with their purpose. You're here to learn how to gather intelligence that saves lives, she began. That's a sacred responsibility. The decisions you make in this job will echo across time. People will live or die based on the accuracy of your analysis. But here's the thing they don't tell you in basic training: you will make mistakes. A young analyst raised her hand. Ma'am, how do we avoid mistakes? You don't? You minimize them. You verify through multiple sources. You question assumptions. You maintain intellectual humility. But even doing everything right, sometimes you'll still get it wrong, because this job is done by humans and humans are fallible. So what do we do when we make a mistake that gets people killed? Grace smiled. Not a happy smile, but a knowing one. You own it. You learn from it. You make sure it never happens again. And you dedicate your life to preventing the next analyst from making the same mistake. That's all you can do. That's all any of us can do. She pulled up the memorial image. The 6 names. These men died because of bad intelligence. But their deaths led to systemic reforms. They led to new verification protocols. They led to this course that you're taking right now. Their deaths had meaning because people chose to give them meaning. The class was silent, absorbing this. You'll all face moments where you have to choose. When the easy path is to bury a mistake, to hide evidence of failure, to protect your career over the truth. In those moments, remember these 6 names. Remember that integrity is more important than reputation. Remember that doing what's right is more important than doing what's safe. After class, several students approached with questions. Grace answered them all, patient and thorough, remembering when she'd been the one seeking guidance. As the last student left, Grace gathered her materials and walked to her car. It was a beautiful spring day, the kind of day that made you believe in second chances. Her phone buzzed, a text from Sarah Parker. Gracie asked about you today. She wants to know when the angel lady is visiting again. Grace smiled and typed back, next month, I'll bring her that book I promised. Another text, this one from Finn. Board meeting tonight, 7 p.m. Don't be late. Wouldn't dream of it. Grace drove through Quantico past the training facilities where new analysts were learning to be better than she'd been. Past the memorial where Ghost and the others were honored, past all the reminders of where she'd been and toward the future she was building. She wasn't running anymore, wasn't hiding from her past. She'd integrated it, learned from it, transformed it into purpose. Grace Sullivan would never forget the screams from that radio, would never stop hearing Ghost's voice calling for help, would never erase the memory of analyzing the intelligence that sent 6 men to their deaths. But she'd learned to live with it, to channel it, to use it to make the world slightly better, slightly safer, slightly more accountable. She was the voice that stayed on the line, the analyst who refused to hide her failure, the woman who spent 3 years hunting justice, the teacher preparing the next generation, the board member supporting families of the fallen. She was all of those things, and she was still here, still fighting, still serving, for Ghost, for Hawk, for Iron Reaper, Shadow, and Viper. Forever, the end. Epilogue, 10 years later, Grace stood at the dedication of a new intelligence training center, the Grace Sullivan Center for Intelligence Integrity, named in her honor despite her protests. I don't deserve this, she'd said when they told her. You do, the CIA director had responded. You changed how we train analysts. You made accountability and ethics central to intelligence work. You've trained over 2,000 analysts in the past decade. Not one of them has made the kind of mistake you made, Because you taught them how to avoid it. The center would house the intelligence ethics program that Grace had developed. It would be mandatory for all new analysts across the entire intelligence community. Finn stood beside her at the dedication along with Sarah Parker and her daughter Gracie, now 13. Other family members of the Silent Hawk team were there too. They'd become Grace's extended family over the years. Your dad would be proud, Royce McKenna said. He was 80 now, still sharp, still showing up when Grace needed support. I hope so, Grace said. I know so. Rowan always said the measure of a person isn't their mistakes. It's what they do after. The ceremony concluded. Grace cut the ribbon. Cameras flashed, but she barely noticed. She was thinking about 6 men she'd never met but knew intimately. 6 men whose deaths had shaped her life, her career, her purpose. As the crowd dispersed, Grace walked to a quiet corner of the facility where a memorial had been installed. The same 6 names carved in stone with a new inscription. They died in service. They are honored in memory. They live on in the analysts trained to never repeat the mistakes that took them. Grace touched each name, a ritual she'd performed thousands of times. Still fighting, she whispered. Still serving. Still making sure you didn't die for nothing. Behind her, Finn approached. You ready to go? Yeah, just saying goodbye. You do this every time? I know. They walked out together into the sunlight, 2 people bound by tragedy and redemption, by failure and growth, by the understanding that the past never leaves, but it doesn't have to define the future. Grace Sullivan had made a mistake that killed 6 men, but she'd spent the rest of her life making sure their deaths meant something. And in the end, that was the only redemption that mattered.